and I I lived there for probably until I left. Well, I left to go to college after high school for a few years, and then I went to a technical institute down in North Carolina. And during the time I was in technical school, I actually got drafted, which was back in those days. When you got drafted into the service, that was the Army, only the armed forces, the Army. They weren't drafting in any other military service like the Marine Corps or the Navy or the Air Force back then. It was just Army. And I got my draft notice, went down to the recruiter, and I said, well, what occupation will they assign me as being drafted? He said, generally you'll be a rifleman. You learn to carry the rifle and everything about it, and be an infantryman. And I said, well, what other occupations do you have available? He said, well, if you enlist in the Army and go for an extra year, which would be a year added to your 2-year draft, that would give you 3 years. So you'd have to serve for a total of 3 years in the Army. But if you take a battery of examination or take a test, however well you do on that test will determine what categories of occupations that you can be trained in the Army. So I decided, yes, I'll do that. So I signed the piece of paper that said that I'll have to be in the Army for not 2 years, but for 3 years. And I'll be enlisting into the Army. I will not be drafted into the Army. I'll be enlisting into the Army. So as a result, I took the test. I did fairly well on the examination, and he gave me a list of occupations I could choose. The one I chose was aircraft maintenance. An aircraft maintenance person would be trained on everything that has to do with certain aircraft in the Army, everything from helicopters, different types of helicopters, to small fixed-wing aircraft, and the maintenance of those aircraft. It could be for structural maintenance, such as the aircraft itself, or it could be more mechanical, such as aircraft engines. So I didn't know exactly where I would be in my schooling for whichever I got into, but under aircraft maintenance, that's what I was hoping to be taught and learn the trade. So I went down. They sent me from, as soon as I went into the Army, I went to Fort Benning, Georgia for basic training. Then from basic training, they sent me to Fort Rucker, Alabama, which is the home of aviation in the United States Army. And there at Fort Rucker, I was in a holdover class for about a week or two, waiting for my class position to open up so I could go in and be a student. Well, during that 2-week period, my lieutenant in my company called out at one of our formations 10 GIs that he wanted to speak to in the office. So after the formation was over, 10 of us went into the office. He spoke to us, and he said, you are been selected to, if you choose to elect to go into a different school, we need some air traffic controllers to be trained, and we would like some volunteers, and we chose you based on your scores. So because of my scores is why I went into the office. He talked to us, and of the 10 GIs who they chose that day, only 2 of us, me and another veteran, decided to waiver our training on aircraft maintenance and elect to go into air traffic control school. So once we signed the dotted line for that, the paper for that, Then it took us about a week before they shipped us off to Keesler Air Force Base in Mississippi, on the coast down there, on the Gulf Coast. And Keesler is who actually trained me in air traffic control. And it was a 16-week course for air traffic, and we were right on the airfield there, and classrooms study. And after the 16 weeks, we went to, we got our orders. Most of us got our orders to go to Vietnam. About 98% of us ended up going to Vietnam with orders. The other 2% went to places such as Alaska and Germany at that time. And so I left. They gave me about 2 weeks, maybe a week or 2 weeks leave before they shipped me off with a group of GIs to Vietnam. And once I got into country in Vietnam, I was assigned to a large Air Force base called Bien Hoa Air Base, the second largest air base in Vietnam. It was an Air Force base. And Ton Sa Nut Air Base, also an Air Force base, is in Saigon. That was the largest airfield that the military had during the Vietnam War. But I was at the second largest airfield. And on the airfield that I was at, we had a designated area where all the Army helicopters were stationed at. And the airfield that I was at was called Spartan Tower, or Spartan Field. And we had 4 helicopter companies that were there. And I'll just show you something here it's Spartan. It's actually Spartan Heliport is what it was. Let me put my glasses on so I can see. And I was part of the. There's my hat. You see my hat? This is on the front here. 1st Aviation Brigade. That's the patch of everybody under the 1st Aviation Brigade unit. And Bien Hoa was the airfield of the town. There's a town called Bien Hoa too. That's where it got its name. And I was there doing all of 1970. And while there, I was in the 1st Aviation Brigade, and what they called the one. I'll show you here. It consisted of the. Let's see. I had it here somewhere. Maybe I had it on something else. It was part of the 165th group. I don't see it on this, but I had it on something else. So you had the U.S. Army, 1st Aviation Brigade, 165th group, and under the 165th group we had 4 helicopter companies. We had the 68th Top Tigers, which was, I'll show you that. This one right here, 68th Top Tigers, and they were called the Raiders also. And we had the 118th, the 118th, they were called the Thunderbirds, Choppers, and Bandits. Then we had the 334th, which is right here. The 334th, they were the Sabres, the Playboys, the Raiders, and what's that one? The Dragons. The Dragons. And these names were given. The company themselves come up with their own names for them, the groups, and so under these this here shows you a little picture here too. See, there's the 1st Aviation Brigade right there, and it's parked. It comes out of actually Long Bend. Long Bend was right near Benoit, which is not shown on this field, but it's kind of near. There's Saigon and Long Bend. I think Benoit is a little bit northwest of Long Bend, Benoit. And but anyway, while in the military, I was assigned to a control tower on this airfield. It's a heliport airfield, which means we have no fixed-wing aircraft. They're all helicopters. And with the different helicopter companies that I just mentioned, we stayed on base, and we had Quonset huts like these, barracks, not Quonset huts, but actually barracks that were built by the armed forces while in Vietnam on this airfield. And this picture here was taken from above the tower. The control, air traffic controllers work in towers. You've probably seen major airports, Charlottesville Airport, whatever. Well, our tower was made out of wood, and that had to be built before we could work traffic out of it. And this is from the top of the tower. Let me show you if I got a. Go ahead. This is some pictures of the airfield, and these little bunkers, they look like bunkers here, okay? But what they are, they're shaped kind of like an L, and they're called revetments. And what's inside, it's made out of steel, like sheet metal, like on these roofs here. That's what they're made out of. But inside, they're filled with a bunch of sandbags.
Was this for you guys to like stand and?
No, it was a protection. Actually, it was a protection wall shaped like an L, and the helicopters would park in each one of these. Okay, and the reason for it is the airfield. We were subject to being rocketed. The VC, the Vietnamese the North Vietnamese, the enemy, they would shell rockets into us. So if the rockets came in and say hit this helicopter right here, the shape of the wall would help keep the debris and the fire ball from going from one to the other, from each. So it's a protection for helicopters in case they got hit. They wouldn't set off a chain of reaction, you know. So that was a reason for the walls being built like that. And of course, here's some pictures of helicopters, and these were all taken from the control tower where I worked. And let's see, I have well, that's not good. I'll show you. I got a better picture of that here somewhere. Okay, there I am. This is me right here working in the tower, and this is the tower itself, made out of wood. We had a little fire station down here in case we needed equipment to go out and put out a fire or anything like that on the airfield, which was another building for the trucks and all. But up here on top was the control tower, and it was made out of wood and plexiglass, no real glass at all. And the helicopters would come and go from the airfield, and I think that's the only pictures I got other than tactics. Let's see. But we had different. Let's see. There's another picture there of a similar type tower. Third man in the cockpit, which means the controller who's actually on the radio, you know, talking. But we would control helicopters coming to and from the airfield. And they would usually fly. You'd have a flight leader who was in charge. He was usually the highest ranking officer or enlisted person in the flight crew. Usually the warrant officers or lieutenants that would fly the helicopters. And the flight leader would do the radio control to the control tower, and he may say, Spartan Tower, this is Raider 24, flight of 7, request landing instructions. We will give them wind information, the barometric pressure, which they need to know, and any other special air traffic control information we need to tell them about. And then when we would clear them to land, that would be a flight of 7 would come in and land at the same time. And so each pilot is required to do his own separation from whichever one he's following. Okay, but the flight leader is the only one who calls the control tower, and then he tells us how many helicopters in his crew, and then we clear them to land or take off, whatever the case might be. They would go out at all times of the night, daytime, early mornings. Most of the crews would get up about 5:30, get into their helicopters, get their helicopters all prepared, armed with rockets, ammunition, and be ready to go in about an hour. And then they would leave, they would have the helicopters ready, they would go in for a quick breakfast, maybe 30 minutes at the most, and then they would be out into their aircraft a second time preparing for takeoff. They would leave early in the morning, like probably 6:30, 5:30, 6:30. Let's say they get out about 5:30, maybe leave about 6:30 in the morning. And depending on the season, have you ever heard of the monsoon season?
Yes.
Okay. Well, the monsoon season is the rainiest, the wettest time of season over in Vietnam, and of course, when you get it's about dawn when they're leaving, you know. So they'd be taking off. They may not come back until in the afternoon, somewhere around 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You may have, in some cases, some would come in, refuel, then take off again. But the ones that would leave, if they did come back, you may have them come back and do another mission, a short mission type thing. And of all the helicopters there, we had probably each helicopter company had probably as many as I would say 20 to 30 helicopters each. And we had 4 helicopter companies, so there was a lot of helicopters. Of course, and we had these are what they call recorders, and these recorders record everything that the controller says on the microphone to the pilots, just like we have in the flying public around here. Everything is recorded because in case of an investigation of an accident or anything, we have the tape to hear what the pilot said, what the controller said. Okay, and so even in wartime, you were being recorded as far as this kind of, for aviation purposes. But the service, I was lucky enough to come back there again. I was on a large air base, so I had plenty of protection as far as the infantry, the Army around us and around the airfield, and we just continued to do our job. We had helicopters that would be coming in, what they call Chinook helicopters. Excuse me, it's called the CH-54 helicopter, which is called the Sky Crane. And the Sky Crane is a huge thing. It's bigger than this building here. Well, yeah, bigger than that building right there. And it virtually sits up real high, and it can just kind of roll right over top of a down aircraft, like a UH-1 helicopter like you've seen in the building and one out there. It's big enough it can go right over top of the helicopter. It has a crane, a steel cable comes down, and you can hook the damaged aircraft up to that, and it can actually lift it up and then fly away and bring it to an air base like we had. So we would see down aircraft, you know, maybe one that was shot down and had to be brought back in and tried to repair it. They would come in with down aircraft and set them down, and then they would roll them off to the hangar or wherever they wanted to repair them, try to see if they could fix them again. But and we had about for each helicopter company, you had 1 to 2 airborne infantry units, not airborne, but like Rangers or Pathfinders. We had Pathfinders that actually lived with our controllers. We had about 10 controllers in our group, and of the 10 controllers, we were housed in those barracks I showed you with what they call Pathfinders. And Pathfinders were kind of like air traffic controllers in the field, but their work was more dangerous because they had to be taken out in helicopter. They would go on board the helicopters. The helicopters would take them out to a remote location where they wanted to do a mass invasion later on. They would go in there with high explosives, and they would actually detonate areas to be leveled, trees, everything leveled, so that they could bring in many helicopters at one time for, say, a landing, and bring the soldiers in to fight the war, depending on how the war was going. So their job was to actually clear a landing zone for troops coming in by air. I was in Vietnam for 1 year, and during that time I was never injured, but we always had the threat of rocket attacks, and many times we got rocketed. The sirens would go off on air base. We had big, I don't think I had any pictures of them, but we had bunkers that we would go into, and the bunkers were probably built about the size of this canopy right here, about that large. They were made out of sandbags. They were about a story tall, not quite a story tall, maybe up as high as these windows right there. And they had sandbags across the tops with that were reinforced underneath with wooden frames and everything. But they would protect us in case of rocket attacks. We always ran to the bunkers, got in there, and then once the all clear signal was given on the air base, then we were able to come out of the bunkers and resume our work on base. You said you had some questions. I forgot all about your questions. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, like, when you left your family, how did you feel? Like,
I was very upset, but I knew I was what I was doing. I felt that this was something I was destined to do, because I felt, I just felt led to help support our military service in the war that was going on at the time. I've been in prayer. I was a Christian, and I believe the Lord was leading me, even though I was going to be going in harm's way. I may not even return. I knew I needed to be part of a group of men and women who were there to support our military and our government.
And did you have any other brothers or sisters who went in the war with you, or were you alone?
I was the only child of my mother and father, but my mother did have an earlier marriage where I had a half-brother, and he was a Korean War veteran. He was in the Army also, and he was a sergeant in the Army, and lived through the Korean War and led a productive life when he came back to civilian life to live.
Were there any effects that the war like after the war, how did you feel? Like, were there things that?
Well, the armed forces during Vietnam, we were not welcomed back by our citizenry because the war was very controversial at the time, and we had a lot of young people, a lot of college people on campuses, and a lot of the general public, adults, didn't favor us being in the war in the first place, and so we were not given as some referred to, a hero's welcome. Returning from the war, we were kind of shunned, and so it's been a hard go as far as that, but every once in a while, as you see things patriotic, from Veterans Day to Memorial Day, you do see some camaraderie of the citizenry with the soldiers and the men and women who were in the armed forces. So it does help.
And how were things different for you when you got back home?
Well, other than people didn't want to hear about your war things that went on in war, and the veterans themselves basically didn't say much. I didn't say much about the war. We kind of kept it to ourselves, and so everything, But my education, I didn't continue my education like many of my veterans did. They into what they call the GI Bill, where you can go to school and they'll pay for your school. I instead went with the air traffic control training that I've been given in the Army. I used that and I applied for the Federal Aviation, the U.S. government Federal Aviation Administration. That's the FAA, and they're air traffic controllers. And so, after about a year and a half back from home. Well, actually, I got out of the service about a year later after I got back from Vietnam. So then I worked for the VEPCO, Virginia Power Electric Company, for a year. And during that time, at the end of that time, I got a promotion to go into the federal government to work as an air traffic controller for the FAA. And I took that, and I retired with 27 years as an air traffic controller. And I attribute all that to the Army. The Army trained me originally, and whenever I talk to young people, I say, if your parents don't have enough money to help you get into college or to any school, the military service is the best place for training. Just find something in the military that you'd like to do in civilian life, so that they can train you to do it. If you like computers, have the military train you as much as you can get on computers in the military. Then if you don't like the military and you don't want to retire in the military, then you can get out, go to work for a computer company or do something, and you won't have too much training to have to go through because you've already had it in the military. So, it's good to carry over and use your experiences that you've had in the military as well.
And how did you communicate with your family during the Vietnam War?
Just with letters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're going to have to wrap up shortly.
Oh,
if
okay.
they haven't eaten, you haven't eaten yet, have you?
No, I haven't.
Okay,
Okay.
you need, because they're going to crank up the buses and leave. So if you need,
Okay.
Okay.
Is there anybody in the back?
No, sir.
So,
Yeah.
just finish these questions.
Okay.
So, like I said before, how did you communicate with your family during the Vietnam War?
Just by letters.
By letters.
By letters only. Yeah.
And did you?
It was kind of maybe on a every other week, about something like that. About every other week. I was married at the time. I had no children, but my wife and I, we were married.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How did you make friends during the war?
During the war, just the people, the veterans I was around working with. That was the most thing. Occasionally, would back in the States, working in the States too, you had civilians that you come in contact with where you lived and everything. But most of the people Most of the military kind of hung out with the military families. Yeah.
And what was your profession? Oh, well, actually, you already answered that, but I think
Yeah.
we're done.
Air traffic control.